Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking part in this fiscal year 2019 training on state purchasing procedures and the State Purchasing Card Program. I am Courtney Sisk-Johnson with the Purchasing Division, and I'm pleased to welcome all West Virginia state officials who are required to take this annual training. I know all of you have very busy schedules, so I appreciate you taking 2 hours of your day today to participate in this session. West Virginia Code 5A-3-60 requires certain state officials to take 2 hours of training annually on purchasing procedures and purchasing card use. Those required to take this training include all executive department cabinet secretaries and their deputies, commissioners and their deputies and assistant commissioners, directors and their deputies and assistant directors, and department heads and their deputies and department assistants. This training is offered twice per fiscal year as a webinar via WebEx. These sessions are also recorded and made available online on the State Auditor's Office and Purchasing Division's websites. The online recording will suffice to meet this requirement for any individual who is unable to participate in one of the 2 scheduled live webinars. For those individuals who choose to view the online recording, they must send us their certificate of completion to ensure that they receive credit for viewing the training. Today's session will last until approximately 11 o'clock. I will begin with information on the state purchasing procedures, and I will be followed by Travis Mullinax from the State Auditor's Office. The Purchasing Division has a staff of approximately 55 full-time employees at the Capitol Complex in Building 15 and at the surplus property location in Dunbar. The Purchasing Division staff provides a service function to your agencies. We are responsible for the procurement of commodities and services that your organization needs to operate your programs and services. These are the people who help make that happen. As mentioned, today's webinar will be recorded and posted on the Purchasing Division's website and also on the State Auditor's Office website within the next couple of weeks. This live webinar and its recording have been approved for 2.4 hours of in-house online CLE credit from the West Virginia State Bar. If you are interested in obtaining CLE credits for today's live webinar, please email your name and bar ID number to Samantha Knapp at the email address located on this screen. Any individual who chooses to view this recording later on may self-report their participation in this training to the State Bar to obtain those CLE credits. Should you have any questions throughout today's presentation, you may type them into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. We will take a few minutes at the end of today's presentation to answer these questions. Those of you on today's webinar represent the top level of management within state government. You are all responsible for leading and managing the delivery of services required of your agencies to the citizens of West Virginia. For your agencies to be successful in delivering these mandated services to our citizens, your agencies need many different types of commodities and services. The Purchasing Division's core function is to obtain on your behalf the commodities and services needed to allow you to fulfill your mission. We depend on and work closely with your procurement staff to fulfill those needs. On this slide, you can see the Purchasing Division's mission, and that is to provide prudent and fair spending practices in procuring quality goods and services at the lowest cost to state taxpayers by maximizing efficiencies and offering guidance to our customers. During today's webinar, we hope that you will obtain a general understanding of who we are, but also what we do and how we do it. We will also be addressing some of the recent changes that went into effect that impact the purchasing process. Before we talk about the process of procurement, I would like to review the organizational structure of the Purchasing Division. As you can see on the screen, Mike Sheets serves as the Director of the Purchasing Division. The division is then made up of 3 sections in addition to our legal counsel. They include the Acquisitions and Contract Administration section, the Communication and Technical Services section, and Program Services. The following staff members oversee these various sections. Assistant Director Frank Whitaker oversees the Acquisitions and Contract Administration section. Assistant Director Elizabeth Perdue oversees Program Services. and currently the Assistant Director for the Communication and Technical Services section is vacant due to a recent retirement. Additionally, Jimmy Meadows serves as the Purchasing Division's General Counsel. And now I will highlight the responsibilities of each section. The Acquisitions and Contract Administration section is responsible for processing purchases expected to exceed $25,000 on behalf of state agencies which fall under our authority. This section also maintains the contract management and agency inspection services programs. We have a staff of 12 buyers and supervisors who are responsible for obtaining the commodities and services on behalf of state agencies. Our buyers are assigned by agency rather than by commodity. They serve as the subject matter experts on the state purchasing process rather than on the specific commodities and services that they buy. The reason we're organized this way is because we believe our expertise should be in our core mission, which is purchasing, and that the staff within your agencies have the specific technical expertise, in most cases, of the commodities and services that you need. We modified our agency buyer assignments in July and also created a dedicated buyer for all of our statewide contracts. Now, Senior Buyer Mark Atkins manages the nearly 60 contracts that are mandatory for use by all state agencies falling under our authority. To assist your agencies in developing specifications, the Purchasing Division has recently created a specification repository which is to be used as a starting point for agencies. These specification templates, which are posted on our website at the link on your screen, can be used and modified by the agency as needed. We currently have specifications for elevator and HVAC maintenance, tractors, and security systems. We plan to add more in the coming months. Looking back at our structure, having our buyers assigned to specific agencies means that each of your agencies has a sole point of contact in the Purchasing Division, which allows the Purchasing Division to provide better customer service to your agencies. The assigned buyer for your agency works together with your agency-designated procurement officers to buy the commodities and services required by your agencies. We feel these relationships are critical in ensuring success during the procurement process. The next section of the Purchasing Division is the Communication and Technical Services section. This section is responsible for technology, communication, professional development and training, and related administrative functions, including vendor registration, imaging and record retention, bid receipt, and purchase order encumbrance. This training today is prepared and coordinated through this section. The final section is Program Services. This section is responsible for several programs administered by the division, including the Surplus Property Program, which manages the state and federal programs for property no longer needed within the respective governments, the Travel Management Office, which offers guidance to state business travelers and oversees statewide contracts for travel-related services, the Fixed Assets Unit, which maintains the state's inventory of personal property. As mentioned previously, we also have a general counsel who manages all of our legal affairs, including contract terms and conditions, disputes and resolutions, drafting legislation, and other relevant legal and administrative issues. Most state governments throughout the nation have a centralized procurement function like West Virginia. However, the administration and rules vary with each state. West Virginia Code centralizes the procurement function of state government within the Purchasing Division in the same way that other functions are centralized for most agencies, such as personnel, technology, finance, and retirement. Some of the benefits of a centralized procurement function include having the consistency of laws, rules, and procedures, gaining economies of scale, and providing system transparency. The Purchasing Division manages procurement transactions for agencies under its authority, including but not limited to those for commodities, services, and technology. State agencies have been delegated the authority to make purchases up to $25,000, with the Purchasing Division processing all transactions expected to exceed that dollar threshold. The Purchasing Division has awarded statewide contracts for commonly used commodities and services, including office supplies, technology equipment and services, and vehicles, just to name a few. We bid and award statewide contracts for these common commodities and services on behalf of all state agencies to take advantage of the economies of scale and to make the ordering process more efficient. A list of all statewide contracts can be found on the Purchasing Division's website. We also buy a wide range of agency-specific commodities and services, including food to medical supplies and everything in between. We participate in cooperative contracts that have been bid and awarded by other public entities around the country to gain economies of scale and shorten the procurement process. These contracts may be used by our agencies upon approval. All of our procedures are based on laws and rules established in West Virginia Code and the West Virginia Code of State Rules. Our primary code citation is 5A-3, and our rules can be found as Title 148, Series 1 of the Code of State Rules. As noted on this slide, there are also specific code citations for architectural and engineering services, construction, and our two set-aside programs, Correctional Industries and the State Use Program. As is the case with many other state functions, there are some exceptions to this centralized procurement system. The legislature has statutorily granted various state agencies the ability to perform some or all of those agencies' needed procurement function outside of the centralized procurement mandate. At this time, the Purchasing Division is aware of 43 full or partial statutory exemptions. Full exemptions include entities such as the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and higher education, while partial exemptions have been granted for the Division of Highways for road construction and PEIA contracts for insurance coverage, among many others. The Purchasing Division has compiled an unofficial list of these statutory exemptions, which can be found on the Purchasing Division's website. Title 148 of the Code of State Rules stipulates that all purchases be approved by the Secretary or head of a spending unit or designee whose name must be filed with the Purchasing Division. The person designated is responsible for the agency's procurement function at the agency delegated level and works directly with the Purchasing Division to process formal acquisitions expected to exceed $25,000. They should be involved at all levels of any future purchases your agency plans to make. Their understanding and knowledge of the state purchasing process can ensure that your agency remains in compliance with state law. It is essential that the designated procurement officers are trained on the Purchasing Division's procedures. In addition to being responsible for any internal training conducted at the agency level, the designee is required by the West Virginia Code of State Rules to take 10 hours annually of training offered by the Purchasing Division, which is tracked on a fiscal year basis. The designated procurement officers for each state spending unit under our authority are listed on our website. This list is updated each fiscal year and as changes occur throughout the year. The link to this listing will be included at the end of our presentation today. The Purchasing Division prides itself in having a comprehensive training program to educate our agency purchasers on the laws and rules which govern the state purchasing process and to assist them in obtaining the 10 hours of required training annually. Trainings are offered through a variety of platforms, including in-person, online via webinars and training modules, and through an annual conference. Our 2018 Agency Purchasing Conference was conducted in early October at Camp Dawson in Kingwood, providing training and networking opportunities. Most of our agency delegated procurement officers were able to receive their 10 hours of required training during that week. We also maintain a state certification program which has been recognized by the Division of Personnel as part of its pay plan policy. That program incorporates public procurement experience, training offered by the Purchasing Division, a hands-on component, and a final examination. More information on our training program can be found on our website, wvpurchasing.gov, by clicking on the training link on the left-hand side of the page. During fiscal year 2018, the Purchasing Division reported that more than 22,000 new award transactions and delivery orders were processed, exceeding $489 million. This number includes all delivery orders processed against central master agreements at both the agency level, which are called agency delivery orders, and through the Purchasing Division, which are called central delivery orders. A central master agreement, which is processed by the Purchasing Division, covers a specified period in which all terms, conditions, and prices are stated, but quantity is not. Delivery orders may be made from these contracts for specific quantities. Nearly 54% of the contracts and delivery orders for fiscal year 2018 were awarded to West Virginia companies. In addition to new purchase and delivery orders, we also processed nearly 1,800 change orders to existing contracts. These numbers show the significance of what we do. It is because this money comes from our taxpayer dollars that we have a duty to ensure that it is being spent efficiently and ethically. For this reason, we have developed a decision path to assist our agency purchasers from the time the agency determines a need to the award of a purchase order or contract. For additional statistical data for fiscal year 2018, please see our annual report that may be accessed from our homepage at wvpurchasing.gov. This slide highlights the first few steps in the purchasing decision path. Step 1 requires the agency to first determine its need. In other words, what is the product or service required by the agency, what quality and quantity is needed, what is the estimated cost, and are there any special delivery requirements? Once your agency has determined that information, you can move on to step 2 of the process, which is seeking availability of the commodity or service through internal sources. There are 3 internal sources, including correctional industries, the State Use Program, also known as sheltered workshops, and the West Virginia State Agency for Surplus Property. Correctional industries and sheltered workshops are mandatory for use. That means if the product or service is available through either of these entities, it must be acquired in this manner. If the product or service is available but not in the required time, quality, quantity, or other factors, then a written waiver must be issued from correctional industries or sheltered workshops in accordance with purchasing guidelines. Surplus property is optional but strongly encouraged for use for state agencies when needing furniture, vehicles, equipment, and many other commodities. A waiver from surplus property is not required, but keep in mind that it's another source that may save your agency money. If the product or service is not available from any of the internal sources, Step 3 requires the agency to determine if the product or service is available from an existing statewide or agency contract. If it is available from either of these types of contracts, the agency must purchase the product or service from that statewide or agency contract. Although we don't have it mentioned on this slide, if the commodity or service is not available from a statewide or agency contract, the next step requires the agency to determine if the purchase is considered an emergency purchase or direct award. I will go into more detail about these purchase types later, but for your reference, more information on these types of purchases can be found in the Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook. If you've gone through the first few steps of the process and can't find the commodity or service on any of these mandatory contracts, and you have determined this will not be an emergency or direct award purchase, at this point, you would be looking at the competitive bidding process. There are several types of competitive solicitations used by the Purchasing Division. I'll get into those in a minute, but first, please note that agencies are delegated the authority to purchase commodities and services up to $25,000, and there are some spending thresholds within that amount they should be aware of. The thresholds within agency delegated authority are outlined on this slide. Agencies cannot exceed a spending threshold without the proper level of documentation and bidding. Commodities and services that are expected to cost $2,500 or less require no bids, although competition is always encouraged. Purchases of $2,500.01 to $10,000 require 3 verbal bids, and the lowest bid meeting specifications must be awarded the purchase order or contract. Purchases of $10,001 to $25,000 require 3 written bids, and the lowest bid meeting specifications must be awarded the purchase order or contract. Any purchase expected to exceed $25,000 is considered a formal purchase and must be processed through the purchasing division. In short, the agency would process the competitive solicitation at the agency level following its agency delegated procedures if it's expected to cost $25,000 or less, or at the formal level if it's expected to exceed $25,000. All vendors conducting business with the state of West Virginia are required to register with the Purchasing Division in accordance with West Virginia Code 5A-3-12. There is an exception to this registration requirement, which includes purchasing card vendors providing travel-related services or receiving an aggregate total yearly payment of less than $25,000 from a state spending unit. Keep in mind, vendors do not have to be an approved paid vendor to submit a bid, but only to receive a purchase order or contract. However, they may be required to create an account in WVOASIS to submit their bid electronically. Vendors are encouraged to register through the Vendor Self-Service Portal as part of WVOASIS, but may also still complete a paper form through our registration office. Vendors receiving orders for goods or services exceeding $2,500, regardless of payment method, must pay an annual fee of $125. There are a couple of exceptions as to who must pay the fee. These include purchasing card vendors providing travel-related services or receiving an aggregate total yearly payment of less than $25,000 from a spending unit, as well as direct award vendors and those vendors who are providing goods and services that have been declared as non-competitive, exempted products or services listed in Section 9 of our Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook. Vendors must also be in good standing with other state and local agencies, such as the Secretary of State's Office and Workers' Compensation, to be able to receive a purchase order or contract. Anytime your agency determines that it will need to competitively solicit goods or services, you should immediately begin to think about the specifications, which will be the basis for everything you'll do moving forward. A specification is a concise statement explaining the type of good or service that is needed, the quality level, and special requirements in the design, performance, delivery, and usage. There are 3 different types of specifications, which include brand name or equal, performance, and design. In short, the brand name or equal type requires the words or equal to follow the brand name to inform vendors that alternate bids will be considered. I will discuss in just a few minutes a new process that was incorporated into legislation that passed this year that does allow agencies to create a standard, eliminating the need for the or equal language in some instances. The performance specification focuses more on how well an item operates and includes total ownership cost for operating and maintaining the product. The design specification concentrates on the dimensional and other physical requirements of the item being purchased, and it's used when a commodity has to be specially made to meet the agency's unique needs. Specifications are incorporated into the requisition that the agency submits to the Purchasing Division for formal purchases and into the solicitation advertised by agencies for agency delegated purchases. Not only do specifications tell the vendor exactly what your agency needs, they often serve as your defense if a vendor protests a contract award. We'll discuss protests a little later on. The Purchasing Division strongly believes in the importance of specifications. This year, we announced the first recipient for the Purchasing Division's Excellence in Specification Writing Award, which looks at the scope, pricing, administrative, time, and appearance readability of the specification. The Department of Transportation's Division of Highways was selected for this award for specifications that were written for its Class 371 41,000 GVWR single-axle dump truck with hydraulic system, snowplow, and V-box spreader. Now that we've addressed the importance of specifications, let's review some of the competitive solicitation types used by the Purchasing Division. The most commonly used method of procurement is the Request for Quotation method, or RFQ. This type of purchase is used to acquire all tangible property, such as equipment and supplies. The basis for award with this method is straightforward. The award is made to the lowest responsible bidder who meets all mandatory specifications. The next type is a Request for Proposals method, referred to as an RFP, and is typically used for services. This type is a best value procurement method and is limited to procurements with an estimated value of $100,000 or more. The agency must obtain approval from the purchasing director to use this method. They must submit their justification for using this process in writing, whether the solicitation will ultimately replace a current purchase order or contract, and identify what that contract is if it does. The RFP is received in two distinct parts, the technical proposal and the cost proposal. The evaluation is based on a 100-point total score, with cost representing a minimum of 30 of the 100 points possible. The technical proposal is open first, and the RFP Evaluation Committee reviews and evaluates those, sending their written consensus to the Purchasing Division buyer. Vendors must score a minimum of 70% of the 70 points possible to be considered. This is known as the minimum acceptable score. Vendors who do not obtain the minimum accepted score, which is 49 points in most cases, are disqualified and removed from further consideration. The cost proposals are then opened. The Evaluation Committee will review the cost proposals, assign appropriate points, and make a final consensus recommendation to the Purchasing Division buyer. The award is based on the highest score, which is a combination of the technical proposals and the cost proposals. A second best value procurement method that we utilize is the Expression of Interest, or EOI. This type is utilized in the procurement of architectural and engineering services for projects estimated to exceed $250,000. The EOI includes a statement of qualifications and performance data and may include a vendor's anticipated concepts and proposed methods of approach to a project. The committee will evaluate the information submitted with the proposal and then develop a short list of 3 firms they believe are best qualified to perform the desired service. They'll then meet with each firm on the short list to conduct an interview to discuss their anticipated concepts and proposed methods. The committee will rank the firms deemed to be most highly qualified based on the information discussed during their interview and submit that list to the Purchasing Division. At that time, the agency will enter into negotiations with the most qualified firm as to the scope of service and price. If the agency fails to negotiate a satisfactory contract with the most qualified firm, they will then move on to the next firm. If negotiations fail with all firms, they will rebid the solicitation. The Purchasing Division uses WVOASIS, the state's enterprise resource planning system, and its vendor self-service vendor portal. WVOASIS allows us to advertise all solicitations expected to exceed $10,000, with vendors having access to that information in real time. The advertising mechanism in WVOASIS is called the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin. Using the Vendor Self-Service Vendor Portal, vendors can search for current solicitation using keywords. They can view solicitations processed at the agency delegated level, as well as those processed at the formal level. Within WVOASIS, solicitations are assigned an A or a C in front of the document name. Those with an A are processed at the agency level, and those with a C, which stands for Centralized, are processed by the Purchasing Division. As previously mentioned, a vendor does not have to be registered to submit a bid, but will need to create an account if that bid is submitted electronically. One of the benefits of creating an account is that a vendor can assign itself commodity codes, which means that they would be notified any time a solicitation is publicized using those commodity codes. This makes it much easier for the vendor to stay informed of ongoing solicitations. The Purchasing Division requests the assistance of the state agency in evaluating the bids for its solicitations, since they wrote the specifications and have a full understanding of what they need. After they review the bids, the agencies then submit a recommendation for award to the Purchasing Division. For formal acquisitions or those exceeding $25,000, the Purchasing Division is the only entity that can issue or change those contracts, and all questions regarding those contracts should be directed to the Purchasing Division buyer who is or was responsible for processing that contract. After the evaluation process, the Purchasing Division will send the contract to the Attorney General's office for approval as to form. Upon approval, the contract is then encumbered by the Purchasing Division and sent to the vendor. Encumbrance ensures that the agency has the funds to make the specific purchase. No work can begin until the vendor has the encumbered purchase order or contract in hand or until a notice to proceed is issued. It is important to note that from the time an agency submits a requisition to the Purchasing Division until an award is made, no communication may be made between the agency and any vendor pertaining to the solicitation to ensure fairness and transparency. This is considered the blackout period, and all communication with vendors relating to this solicitation must be directed to the Purchasing Division buyer. The Code of State Rules gives vendors the opportunity to challenge the contract specifications written by the agency or to challenge the ultimate contract award. The protest of specifications allows the vendor to protest the specifications prior to the actual award being made and prior to bids being opened and must be submitted no later than 5 working days prior to the bid opening. The protest of specifications is intended to guard against an agency that inadvertently drafted specifications that circumvent the requirement that competitive bids be obtained. This may be done by including specifications that are too restrictive that only a few vendors can meet them, or by including specifications that are too vague, allowing vendors to provide a less than acceptable quality level commodity or service. The protest of award, on the other hand, is the most common type of protest received by the Purchasing Division. This type of protest must be submitted no later than 5 working days after the award is made, which is the day the contract is encumbered. There are several reasons a vendor may protest the contract of award. Some include the winning vendor may have bid inferior commodities that are not in fact equal. The winning vendor may have failed to meet a mandatory specification, which was ultimately missed by the agency and/or the Purchasing Division during the evaluation process. Or the winning vendor might not be a resident as they claimed and for which they received a preference during the evaluation process. So we've talked about the various types of competitive procurements, but now I want to touch on some other types. The first is direct award procurements. Direct award procurements was one of the changes that occurred from Senate Bill 283 during the 2018 legislative session. Direct award is when a commodity or service is believed to be available by one vendor or that no other vendor would be willing or able to provide the commodity or service without a detrimental effect to the agency. In all cases, the law requires that agencies document their attempts to secure competition. For purchases up to $25,000, the agency declares and processes its own direct award procurements and must provide written justification in the agency file. A direct award request for consideration form, WV-65A, must be completed and approved by the agency procurement officer. This will be important to remember for when our Purchasing Division inspectors visit your agency to inspect its purchases for compliance. For direct award procurements that are expected to exceed $25,000, the agency must complete and submit to the Purchasing Division a direct award request for consideration form, WV-65, to determine the basis for the direct award procurement and the specific efforts made to determine the availability of other sources. For direct awards processed by the agency and those processed through the purchasing division, the intent to make the direct award procurement must be advertised to the vendor community for a period of no less than 10 business days. The purchasing division advertises in the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin that I talked about earlier on the vendor self-service portal to allow vendors the opportunity to express interest in the direct award procurement. If a vendor expresses interest and provides proper documentation that they can in fact provide the commodity or service in question, then the purchasing division may reject the direct award and require the agency to competitively bid that commodity or service. If no vendors respond, however, the purchasing division may then proceed with a direct award purchase with the vendor. West Virginia Code also recognizes that purchases may be necessary when unforeseen causes arise, including delays by contractors, delays in transportation, an unanticipated volume of work, flooding to workplace buildings, power outages, or fires. 3 bids are required for emergency purchases if possible. Emergency purchases that are expected to exceed $25,000 must first be approved by the purchasing director. However, if the emergency occurs after business hours, on a weekend, or on a holiday, the agency may proceed with the emergency purchase but must follow up with the purchasing director on the first business day with their justification and all documentation. An emergency purchase is a short-term solution to fix a problem and may not be used as a permanent or long-term solution or to circumvent the normal competitive bidding process. Instead, an emergency purchase allows for an immediate solution to a problem until it can be properly bid. Keep in mind that emergency purchases are not used for hardship resulting from neglect, poor planning, or lack of organization by the spending unit. The purchasing division also maintains a non-competitive exempt list of commodities and services, which is updated each July. This list can be found as Section 9 of the Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook. The purchasing director has the authority to determine that it is not possible to obtain certain commodities and services through the competitive bidding process, and purchasing division approval is not required for these procurements unless specifically noted. However, spending units purchasing from vendors under the exempt list must continue to observe the standard purchasing procedure associated with a normal purchase of the same dollar amount, including vendor registration, and must continue to submit contracts to the Attorney General's office for approval as to form. Now let's discuss what to do in the event that you experience any issues with vendors. First and foremost, ensure that you understand the contract in its entirety and its requirements. Does the issue tie back to a specification that the vendor has failed to meet? Have you brought up the issue with the vendor? In some cases, they may not even know there is an issue. Make sure to give them an opportunity to make things right. Be sure to document all efforts made to resolve the issue, including phone conversations, emails, and letters. And finally, if multiple attempts to resolve the issue have failed, you can complete the Vendor for Performance WV-82 form and submit it to the Purchasing Division with all supporting documentation and correspondence. If one agency has an issue with a vendor, other agencies may as well. Having that documentation will assist the Purchasing Division in coming to a solution of how to proceed. Due to a collective effort to make the state procurement process more efficient and expedient, the Purchasing Division worked closely with our agency purchasers, the administration, and legislators during the past few years to identify areas that would improve how we purchase commodities and services while maintaining the safeguards and integrity of the procurement process. Because of this continued effort, we shared our suggestions with the governor's staff, who sponsored Senate Bill 283, which was passed and signed into law effective June 8, 2018. I would like to provide a brief overview of these changes. Open-ended maintenance and repair construction contracts are now allowed up to $500,000. This applies to the entire term of the contract, including all renewals. Agencies are now allowed to select the best product by comparing vendor proposals against one another and considering best-in-class solutions that exceed the specifications. Previously, the proposals had to be compared only to the specifications and not among each proposal. The need to certify that only one vendor in the world can provide a commodity or service has been eliminated since it was so difficult to prove. Instead, the agency may certify that no one would be likely to provide the commodity or service under the current circumstances. The public notice requirements continue to apply, allowing the vendor community to notify the state when a vendor believes it can provide the commodity or service. The advertisement period must be no less than 10 business days. Increases the master contract time from 1 year to 3 and increases the spending limit on commodities for secondary bidding from $50,000 to $1 million per order. Procedures have been established for setting standards which will eliminate the need for or equal specifications for that particular commodity and would last for a stated period of time. An emergency section to West Virginia Code 5G-1-3 that now allows for the emergency purchase of design and engineering work even when the cost of the project is expected to exceed $250,000 to quickly stop problems from becoming more dangerous and costlier to repair. Another change expands debarment grounds to cover admissions of guilt that do not lead to conviction, other general bad behavior, and related parties. The traditional vendor preference on all commodities and services has been removed with the exception of purchases for automobiles and certain highway-related construction equipment. A reciprocal preference is now in place that will provide West Virginia vendors with the same percentage of preference against out-of-state vendors when that state provides a preference in favor of its resident vendors. The limit for the disclosure of interested parties to contracts form increased from $100,000 to $1 million. Additionally, this form no longer applies to publicly traded companies. Vehicles being sold to an eligible organization, which is another government entity or nonprofit organization permitted to buy at the West Virginia State Agency for Surplus Property, or WVSASP, is required to be at the average loan value as listed in the NADA, which will allow WVSASP to more easily establish a realistic price to facilitate increased sales of used vehicles to eligible organizations around the state. State agencies may now receive proceeds from the sale of assets by the WVSASP when the original purchase fund no longer exists. Previously, if the fund through which the original purchase was made no longer existed, WVSASP could not legally reimburse another fund within that agency. The agency delegated verbal bid limit that originally ranged from $2,500 to $5,000 was increased to $2,500 to $10,000. Also, screen prints from websites offering to sell goods and services may now be allowed as acceptable documentation for the verbal bid limit. Longer base terms for software contracts with maintenance, up to 5 years, are now permitted. The standard formats for the request for proposal and expression of interest processes were revised to provide clarification and more ease of use, and the limit for the allowable use of the request for proposal process was lowered from $250,000 to $100,000 upon the purchasing director's approval. Now that we've discussed the organizational structure of the purchasing division, in addition to various types of procurement methods, I'll briefly touch on other programs that are administered by the purchasing division. The first is the Travel Management Office. The Travel Management Office offers guidance through the state travel policy, which governs state employees who are conducting in-state, out-of-state, and international business travel with the state of West Virginia. This policy addresses such areas as transportation, lodging, meals, registration fees, other expenses, and forms of payment. Fixed assets. Agencies are responsible for certifying their inventory by July 15th of every year. The agency head must certify the date of the last physical inventory, that all items meeting entry requirements have been entered into the fixed asset system, and that all retired items were retired in accordance with surplus property policy, procedures, and guidelines. A physical inventory must be conducted once every 3 years. And the final program is surplus property. The West Virginia State Agency for Surplus Property is responsible for the disposition of commodities or expendable commodities no longer needed by the state, or more specifically, the owning state agency. Surplus property must approve all methods of disposition related to the commodities regardless of the acquisition cost. This slide leaves you with a few helpful resources should you wish to learn more about the state purchasing process, including the procurement officer listing I mentioned earlier in this presentation, the Purchasing Division's website, the new Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook, which went into effect October 26, 2018, the Vendor Procurement Guide, which we recently revised in its entirety in September, and our intranet site. Please keep in mind that we will take a few minutes at the end of today's presentation to answer any questions you may have, so please continue to send those questions to the host. On behalf of the Purchasing Division, I appreciate your attention. We will now prepare the presentation slides for the purchasing card portion of today's training. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. We are about to resume again. My name is Travis Molinax, Training Administrator for the Purchasing Card Program, who is housed underneath the Auditor's Office. I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you, Courtney, and the Purchasing Division for a job well done on your first hour of training here. It is a privilege to be with you all. I hope your day has started out well, and that as we head into the holiday season here, that your agency is looking really good when it comes to conducting its business on behalf of the state. This next hour, I'd like to take a moment and just speak about the Purchasing Card Program, no doubt a program that many of you are already familiar with. But just in case there are some attendees today to which your knowledge of the program might not be as diverse or as deep, certainly appreciate your attention as we go through the program. Some of the basics of the program we will address, so that hopefully at the end of our time together you will have a better understanding of the Purchasing Card Program, its benefits to the state, and how it can benefit your agency directly. So first of all, the agenda for today, I do want to take a time just to speak about card statistics and utilization. It is really important to make sure that you as an agency are aware of this information. It's important. And when it comes to the utilization of the card within your agency, we certainly hope that you are analyzing and recognizing all the different areas by which the card can be used. And I will speak to a few of those in examples as we progress. I will then transition to the general information element of the Purchasing Card Program. It's real important that you understand this. I do address the general information every single time I speak because it is of that great of value. And certainly for those that are in attendance today, this presentation speaks directly to you and your responsibilities as agency heads, as CFOs, whatever your title may be within your agency. You are at a position of responsibility and leadership, and so we will certainly address the general information for your benefit. And then we will transition to a hot word in state government right now called transparency. We as state employees it's so important for us to make sure that we are accountable to the general public on how we spend state taxpayers' money. And so this topic of transparency we will address at the end of our talk here this hour, and certainly we'll be able to answer any questions afterwards on any of the topics that I discuss with you. So first and foremost, let's discuss card statistics and utilization. we have approximately 7,700 P cards statewide. That covers every state agency, regardless of higher education agencies to just your standard state agency to your boards and commissions. There's approximately 130 state agencies that make up the P card family. And of those 130 plus state agencies, we have 188 master accounts. Naturally, there are some state agencies that have multiple master accounts or managing accounts, depending on how you would like to verbalize that, to help them conduct their business well. For example, our friends in the department and DOT, Division of Transportation, they are, I think they have over 20 different master accounts in play for them in order to handle their business. So we're certainly grateful for all of the agencies that are part of our program and all the different master accounts that everyone is responsible for. There are approximately of those master accounts in play, we conducted for fiscal year 2018 approximately 595,000 transactions. It's an incredible number, just shy of 600,000 transactions for the entire fiscal year. The average of all of them, if we add them all up and divide accordingly, we get about a $683, almost $684 per transaction cost. This calculates to about a $406 million volume, which is roughly just around 10% of the total state budget. This puts us in a position when we compare the purchasing card program with other state agencies or state governments, around the country. We are certainly in the top 3 programs in the country when it comes to the percentage of the overall state budget that utilizes the P card as a payment mechanism. This is really good. This makes us a leader in the industry, and this makes us as an example to other state governments that are utilizing the purchasing card program and how to be able to conduct the P card program successfully. We have the P card program not only at the state level, which is primarily what I'll be talking with you all today, but we also have it in the local government level as well. Now, $37+ million in cost avoidance savings. I would like to discuss that point here in a second, and I usually do talk about this. This is a really important element to consider. With the P card, there is a comparison that we can do. If you analyze your more traditional procure-to-pay method of payment, there is obviously innate costs that come about with that. And whether it's your processing cost, whether it is the cost of actually having a check printed, there are costs involved. And in the traditional versus the P card, yes, in P card we still have some administrative costs, but naturally there's not going to be a check printed, for example. The cost for printing a check in of itself is around $100 or so just to print a check. And that can be very costly to the state in general. So when we talk about this $37 million in cost avoidance savings, what that comes from, or that value comes from, is just the reality that when we have a transaction, if we would go from a traditional procure-to-pay, it would have a set cost. If we would have switched that to a P card type payment, we would have an innate savings that would occur as a result. And the savings in play then, considering the 595,000 transactions that were put on the P card, and considering the savings per transaction that I'll discuss in a few slides here down the line, we have here what will amount to a $37 million in cost avoidance savings. Specifically, according to industry standards, the cost of your traditional procure-to-pay process can range between $50 to $200 depending on the situation. When we switch it, though, that's where the savings comes. But when we keep it the traditional procure-to-pay, that is a large number of check payments that are made for low-value items to a large number of suppliers. So if you think about it, how many times is the state cutting a check and the dollar amount written on that check is less than the amount of money that it took to process that check? whether it was the cutting of the check directly or even the, if you will, the cost of processing. So many times in the state government, we are issuing checks, a large amount of checks for low value items, and this becomes a very costly and inefficient process. In fact, when we switch to the P card, naturally there is this savings that occurs that I've been speaking on, and that savings can range between 55 to 80% savings right off the bat, just switching it over. According to the National Association of Purchasing Card Professionals, the typical savings is $63 per transaction. So that $63 is what we are using in our analysis. So going back to that 595,000 transactions that were done last fiscal year, you multiply that by $63 and approximately $37 million in savings. And if you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, that is a savings that the state really needed. We know when it comes to the budget and trying to make sure we have plenty of revenue coming in and savings as we try as good state employees to be mindful of the budget, we need to save money everywhere we can. So using the P card, we naturally save the state money in cost avoidance. In last fiscal year, that's $37 million of savings in cost avoidance enabled the state to channel that $37 million to so many other avenues that the state needed to find money. And so we're thankful for that, for everyone that uses the P card. You contributed to that $37 million of savings, and we are so grateful for that. The state is grateful as a whole for that savings. Last February, the state auditor, Auditor McCuskey, had a press release that he released out, and it speaks to the reality of the checks and the importance to make sure that vendors are set up for EFT, electronic fund transfer type payments. Now, I would take a moment here just to read a few of the paragraphs within this screenshot that you're seeing here. Beginning in the opening paragraph, the auditor is encouraging all vendors doing business with the state of West Virginia to go to the auditor's office website and file to receive payment through EFT, electronic fund transfer payment system, or accept the state P card, purchasing card. And the reason for this is because if you look at the last paragraph, currently the auditor states here again in February of this year that his office prints and distributes approximately 20,000 checks to vendors per week. Per week. Now, I'm not sure what the number is today. Obviously, this was released in February. That number might be a little bit smaller today. But still, if you wrap your mind around that concept of 20,000 checks to vendors per week, that is a massive number. And so you can completely understand the auditor's vision and goal here to make sure that vendors are set up to receive payments through an electronic mechanism. Again, whether through the EFT process or through the state P card process. And switching all of our vendors to that is really going to enable that savings to be captured. In March 31st, any new vendor doing business with the state, whether it's in-state or out-of-state this vendor, they are required to use an EFT system or accept payment through the P card. And then those companies already doing business with the state, they will have to switch over at the time of their annual renewal. So all of this discussion on could we save the state more money, I think we all can be in agreement that, yes, most certainly we could have. And specifically, we need to ask the question, are we doing our part as state employees? For those of you that are in the position within your agency to make decisions, are you as an agency at the agency level doing your part to ensure that we are saving the state as much money as we possibly can? Because if we can do it within our agency, if you will, at the smaller level, then that helps the whole. That helps the state as a whole. And that's kind of how we need to approach state government. We got to think of the whole when we consider saving the state money through the use of the P card program. That's what it does for us. Using the P card helps the whole, helps the state as a whole to save money. Now, at this time, I would like to transition now to some general information about our purchasing card program. Again, this is for your benefit as a reminder or as a review, and for those that may be attending this training for the very first time, hopefully this will help educate you a little bit more on the purchasing card program. We currently have about 6 different types of purchasing card. The most common and widely used one is simply called the one card. That card is not locked down to any specific merchant category code. It is open and available to make any purchases that is deemed necessary on behalf of the state for your agency. And again, this is our most widely used card. We also have 2 types of travel-related card. We have the travel card, which is a card that is issued in the name of an individual. John Doe, for example, would have a travel-only card if his agency decided to give him a card. But the uniqueness about this card is that it is locked down to travel-only merchant category codes. He would not be able to purchase items like office supplies, for example, non-travel related type purchases. It's locked down. The ghost card accounts, now these accounts are not issued in the name of an individual, but rather they are issued in the name of the agency, or if you will, it's simply called a department travel card. This is not a physical card that a traveler takes with them. This card stays within the agency itself. It is assigned to an individual for reconciliation purposes, and that individual person might be the one that is responsible for the booking of travel-related purchases utilizing that ghost card on behalf of a state employee within their agency. The most common purchases utilized with the ghost card would be your hotel stays or your airline reservations, or maybe a rental car reservation. So those are more typical. But we also have what is called a virtual card. Now, a virtual card is a newer card to our platform, and the idea behind that is that this is not a physical card in hand, like a hard plastic card in hand that the cardholder takes with them. But when a vendor is set up with the bank to accept virtual card type transactions, then a cardholder is able to go to the vendor. They're able to secure the goods or the services that they're trying to secure, and the vendor itself will communicate with the bank. The bank will send them a virtual card number, if you will, a one-time use number. The transaction will take place, and when it's done, that virtual card number that was utilized disappears. So it's really a one-time use card number, but a vendor does have to be set up in order to accept, or to be set up as a virtual card vendor in order for those type of transactions to occur. We have the managing spend card, or if you will, a declining balance card. Some of our higher education spending units, they utilize this type of card for their athletic programs. And we also have the emergency cards for those agencies that have emergency personnel. Whenever a state of emergency is declared, these cards become activated. The dollar amounts are determined, and so that those in the field can secure goods or services to fill the gap when it comes to a state emergency. And then we have, lastly, the fleet cards. The P card can be used as a fleet card. Now, we have partnered, so to speak, with the Fleet Management Division. Specifically, we have taken over what was used as, or what was called the red cards, or the ARI fuel cards, utilized for equipment and rental purposes that at one time was provided by Fleet Management Division. Now, they're no longer in use, the red cards, effective in July of this year. You probably know that already. Those that did utilize the red fuel cards were supposed to transition over to the P card itself. And the P card can now, and has always been able to be utilized for those type of transactions. Being that the new method to purchase fuel for equipment and rentals was now used with the P card, this does not have an impact on what is called the blue fuel cards. So if you are an agency that utilizes the vehicle fuel cards, the blue cards, you maintain the use of those cards. But any questions that you might have, you can either contact us or fleet management directly, and they would be sure to answer any questions you might have over that. So we've discussed in part the savings that comes about with the P card. And so it should be no surprise then with this statement that the P card itself is the preferred method of payment. It really does provide an efficient and an effective process for the payment of state expenditures. There are so many benefits besides the cost savings that comes about. Therefore, it also offers this great sense of monitoring and increased controls, because in reality, the moment that a card is swiped, we know exactly where the card holder is located, what they purchased, the items in detail. We know the vendors. We know all that information because that swipe is an electronic record, and we are able to capture that. Now, at the agency level, of course, it's important for good monitoring to occur, and that monitoring must happen. But specifically, there are what is called the P card policies and procedures. Now, the P card on the state auditor side, this is the minimum standards. But it is incumbent upon every single agency to make sure that you develop and document your own internal control procedures to ensure that the program within your agency is following all the rules and regulations, all the policies and procedures that govern your agency, that they're being followed, that you're following all purchasing rules. Every single entity that you're supposed to follow before a goods or services are secured, you need to make sure that your internal control procedures highlight those, and that is complete and thorough. Now, we within the auditor's office P card division, we need to have a copy of those internal control procedures. So if you're listening today and you are unsure whether or not we, the P card division, have a copy of your internal control procedures specific to how you conduct the P card program, we need to have those on file in our office. So please make a note to double check this if you need to. And if you need to file those with us, please email that to the following email address, pcardoperations@wvsao.gov. And certainly be sure to make sure that they cover all the bases of your program internally to make sure that it is thorough and complete. So sometimes we get asked questions as to who is supposed to be knowledgeable of the P card program. Well, by default, of course, your cardholders and your coordinators need to be. They need to be knowledgeable of all the rules and guidelines, and they make sure they follow them to the complete and total degree of everything. But not just them. You, if you are listening and you are an agency head, if you are a CFO, if you are a department head, or if you're a director, a manager, a supervisor, if you're listening today, all of those individuals also need to be knowledgeable of all of the directives that we have talked about thus far. If you are not knowledgeable of that, we have what is called the purchasing card policy procedures that I've talked about. They are posted on the auditor's website in the P card section of the auditor's website. I would encourage you and recommend going there to retrieve those, or you can speak to the primary coordinator within your agency to obtain copies of the policies and procedures. I would certainly welcome you to become very knowledgeable of that, because ultimately, it is the agency head who shall serve as the individual as the CFO, or if they designate an individual to serve the CFO, you are ultimately responsible for the administration of the program. You are responsible for the monitoring of the program, and you are responsible for the oversight of the program, every single element. So if something is going wrong, if there's fraud occurring in your agency, if there's misuse and abuse, you are ultimately responsible, and you need to know about it, and you need to take the appropriate steps. So really important to make sure that you are engaged in this P card program within your agency. Every single transaction that is put on the card, of course, this is only permitted if you're following all the rules and regulations, the policy procedures, any governing instruments that are in play. You need to make sure that those are checked first before the transaction occurs, just to make sure you're following all of that stuff appropriately. And within your internal control procedures, you need to make sure that is there as well. Every P-card coordinator needs to have a disposition of knowledge and experience. So if you feel as though you have deficiencies within your P-card program, as you review it, as you look through the monitoring of it and the oversight, like, wow, we really need more men or women in positions as coordinator to help us be more successful, I would encourage you to do that. Seek out those people within your agency that you feel you can trust, that are people of integrity, that can step in and fill in the gap and try to make your program really successful. One of the elements that is important at the agency level, though, is to make sure that there is proper backups. Naturally, there is a primary coordinator. This person is our first wave of defense, if you will. This is the person, the primary, that we go to with all questions. Hey, where are you with your payments? Where are you on your program, the primary? But it is really important to make sure that not just having a person in a primary position is crucial, but to also have somebody as a co-coordinator, or even, if you will, a financial P-card coordinator. Now, there needs to be an adequate backup for that primary. So if your agency does not have a co-coordinator or a financial coordinator as a proper backup for that primary, this is something that, according to the policies and procedures, you need to have in place. There needs to be somebody there as that backup. So please take a look at your program and make sure that person is there. If they're not, then this is a next step for you to accomplish. Naturally, no cardholder should be their own coordinator without written approval from our office. This really makes sense because naturally we want to make sure that no person can secure the goods, pay for the goods, and approve payment for those goods without proper oversight coming in place. So make sure, if there is a board or commission person listening and they are a very small shop and they are the only person, then you make sure they have a waiver from our office that is signed and on file. As I mentioned earlier, in the internal control procedures, make sure they are in compliance and make sure they are in writing and submitted to our office. When it comes to reconciliation, there are many steps to this that can occur, and every agency is a little bit different. For some agencies, maybe your agency has every single cardholder is responsible for reconciling their transactions directly within Oasis itself. That is great. The system is designed for that. But maybe you're an agency that has some cardholders who do not or are not able to get into the system electronically for the reconciliation, so they're sending their hard copies to someone else. And that person is serving as a proxy and going into the system and reconciling on behalf of the cardholder. Either way is good, but what the cardholder must do, though, they must review all of their transactions to make sure that they are legitimate and for official state business. So this might mean they have to pull their bank statement, going into U.S. Bank's website, access online, and pulling their bank statements and reviewing their transactions there. So it is the cardholder's responsibility first and foremost. But ultimately, the coordinator is ultimately responsible to ensure that all transactions are properly reconciled by the scheduled payment date. Very important. Now, what are some of the things that need to be part of that reconciliation process? Well, supporting documentation. This is really important, and I can tell you that being in the system every single day, I know there are transactions out there that sometimes are missing some of its supporting documentation. It is really important to ensure that all applicable documentation is attached to every single transaction within Oasis. And we kind of state it like this: agencies should adopt a zero-tolerance policy for missing or inadequate documentation. This is really important. And the cardholder, him or herself, who's doing the transaction, they are the ones that need to take responsibility initially for this first wave. They are doing the transaction. So if they are anything like any person like myself, whenever I do reconciliation, whenever that comes, I need to do it right away. I can't wait for the end of the cycle to begin doing my reconciliation. It has always been our recommendation that cardholders reconcile as you go. If you do the transaction today, it will show up in the system tomorrow, and you should be able to reconcile that transaction as soon as 24 hours later. So I would say a good rule of thumb is to reconcile as you go, at least weekly. Try to instill in your cardholders not to wait to the last minute to do the reconciliation. If they do it as they go, then that really helps free your coordinators to do their review and authorize payment in a good, timely manner, and therefore the bill would be able to be paid on time. P-card delegation is prohibited. This still occurs, believe it or not. The P-card program has been in place since 1996. We are 22 years old, and we still have instances of P-card delegation. And what that basically means is a very common sense. If your name is on the P-card, then you are the only person that is allowed to use that P-card. You are the only person that is allowed to have access to the P-card, the bank statements, or anything associated with that card. It needs to be secure. So if you are at your agency and you know of someone who is handing their P-card to someone else, and that someone else is obviously now having access to that card, well, that is delegation, and that is a violation of the policies, procedures, and not allowed. Please, if that is going on within your agency, that needs to stop right away. We need to cancel that card. We need to reissue a new card, and then again, that person by whose name is assigned to that card, only they are to have access to the card's information. They need to keep it very, very secure, very important information. And the reason why this is important is because fraud and misuse and abuse does happen. We all know it does. And it is incumbent upon all of us as state employees charged with the good stewardship of taxpayers' money to make sure that we identify any instance of fraud, misuse, and abuse. Really important. And as such, there is within code a mandate that any time at the agency level there are instances of unlawful use or possible fraud, misappropriation, mismanagement of the P-card, needs to be reported immediately to the CFO, who then in turn immediately tells the P-card division, tells us within 24 hours of your discovery. So in other words, if you know of an instance of fraud, misuse, and abuse, you cannot sit on it. You need to report it as soon as possible. We need to shut down that card as soon as possible. And this really emphasizes the importance of the coordinators doing their duties as reviewers of transactions. If you are a supervisor or a manager and you are charged with reviewing P-card transactions, you are a coordinator. And as such, in that review process, and you're reviewing documentation, do these receipts, do they look legit? Do they look real? Or does it look forged? Did the cardholder, are they up to no good and they're trying to defraud the state? That review process is so vitally important, and please do not rubber stamp that review process. Dig deep in there, take your time, and make sure everything looks on the up and up. And if you have questions, then please feel free to contact your cardholder and ask them about it. We want to cut down the amount of instances of fraud, misuse, and abuse. Of course we do. But here's the beautiful thing. With the P-card being an electronic record, we are able to capture and identify those instances so much easier than in a more traditional procure-to-pay process where you have paper and you're pushing paper, and that review can sometimes get overlooked. So please make sure that a thorough review is taking place. And in any situation where fraud, misuse, and abuse or abuse are taking place, we have a brand new email address that you can contact the state auditor's office, as well as a brand new division dedicated to the care of these type situations. The email address is on your screen. It is simply pcard self-report at wvsao.gov. pcard self-report at wvsao.gov. And some examples of self-reporting is if gift cards were purchased without prior approval. This is actually within the policies and procedures. Now, for gift cards, as well as if you're doing a transaction to which a third-party payment processor, such as PayPal, is being utilized, you have to pause. You have to get prior approval. According to policy and procedures, gift cards and payments to third-party payment processors need to have prior approval. If you don't, if the cardholder goes forward with those purchases without that prior approval, this is a self-report. You, as a coordinator, are charged with emailing the P-card self-report email address and giving us the details of the self-report and letting us know. Additionally, any personal purchases. Now, if you've seen a P-card, as I've no doubt that most of you have, you can tell a big difference between a P-card and maybe your regular banking card or another credit card. It is a bright orange card. Yes, it is similar in color to maybe a Home Depot card, but that's about it. It should stand out to the cardholder if they happen to have it on their person and maybe they're at the gas pump or someplace like that. They need to be able to clearly see that, oop, this is my P-card, put it back in their wallet or their purse, and utilize their personal card for personal type transaction. But if something would occur, they need to email the P-card self-report team, of course, right away, and let that team know and understand what took place. And naturally, employee fraud. We certainly hear of this. This is usually employee fraud, especially on the larger scale, is when you might hear about it in the press. Whenever there's fraud, again, I wish I could say that every single state employee, every single person in the world would never once think twice or anything of committing fraud. But we all know it does take place. And the reality is, it doesn't matter what the method of payment would be. If a person is intending to commit fraud, they will do so. With the P-card, though, we do have the electronic record, and we're able to capture these and identify these situations better. But if you find it in your agency, please email P-card self-report so that the team can analyze and investigate and do the proper steps moving forward. And when I speak about the team, I'm referring to the new division that the Auditor McCuskey developed, and that is the State Auditor's Office Public Integrity and Fraud Unit. This unit here is dedicated to ensuring that state employees are using whatever means of payment and that they're securing the goods and services through the proper means, as well as making sure it is on the up and up, that there's no fraud being committed, no misuse and abuse. This group of individuals are extremely educated, knowledgeable, and gifted in this area, and they are very experienced, and they would be the ones that would be receiving any self-report that you provide through that P-card self-report email address. Should you have any questions to them, there is the email for Mr. Martin Wright, his email being marty.wright@wsao.gov, and Mr. Kelly Snyder, his email, kelly.snyder@wsao.gov. You are welcome to email either one of those gentlemen should you have any questions. At this point, I would like to transfer our conversation or segue our conversation to transparency. Transparency. And it's really important to even have that discussion as it relates to state government, and I'm sure that internally you probably have already had some talks about transparency. But let's define it first of all. What exactly is transparency? Well, there is a website, ballotpedia.org, and they kind of define it as an openness or an accountability. The opportunity for government to have an honest transparency about what is going on internally. And at the heart of it, it's how citizens are able to hold their public officials accountable. The auditor on his website, wvcheckbook.gov, he defines it like this. West Virginia believes transparency leads to more effective and accountable government and a more informed and engaged community. So transparency for the auditor has been such a high level of desire that he actually created, finalized what is called a transparency website, that wvcheckbook.gov that I just mentioned. If you would go to the auditor's website, this is a screenshot right below of the search field within the auditor's homepage. The transparency website, you can see there is the green app. Upon clicking that app, it's going to open itself up to the transparency website, which again is wvcheckbook.gov. Now within this, you can see here, this is a screenshot. If you want to have some questions about revenue, if you're interested in learning about the sources of revenue, West Virginia's revenue, you click there. If you're interested in learning about West Virginia, how it spends its revenue, you would click there. With all the information on the Supreme Court and how they're spending their money, of course, there is some information there that you can click on. There's so much information within the WV Checkbook website. I would encourage you to take the time to go in there, to search around, find some information on how the state is spending their money, the revenue sources, et cetera. This is really valuable. And so robust is this website that the auditor actually released another press release in April, to which it was a celebration of the accomplishment of this website, and specifically the U.S. Public Interest Research Group Education Fund and Frontier Group released their 8th report on government spending transparency websites, and rated West Virginia with their highest rating of an A+ rating out of the 50 states now operating websites. And this is a huge accomplishment for the state. And as you see there, West Virginia has undergone a meteoric rise, and that is to be celebrated. Specifically, the auditor, as you see, he continues within that press release, and you can read that. But on the very last paragraph, I'd like just to read, it says, being recognized as the nation's most transparent state should bring not only pride, but also a great sense of satisfaction to our citizens, knowing revenue and spending are now under public scrutiny. Transparency allows books to be open and elected officials to be held accountable. Such a valuable thing, and we're certainly grateful for it, and all of the men and women that were involved in the creating of that website under Auditor McCuskey's leadership, and certainly that is something to be proud of as a state. But this is P-card. So I bring up transparency because the natural question is, how does P-card help transparency? Can it help transparency? So, and I would like to offer actually a really simple answer, and that is yes. As alluded to earlier, naturally using the P-card makes all transactions electronically historic, and so we know exactly where you are, what vendor you're utilizing, the goods you're buying. So that inevitably gives us a transparency here. But there's also another level to the transparency that we can go. And in that, I want to transition because of our partnership with the purchasing division right now. I want to have that discussion with this. The understanding is that the more we use the system, the more we get out of it. So how well do we communicate when it comes to the procurement division and your payables division? How well do they communicate with one another? How well does your procurement officer and then, if you will, even your payables, and then down to the cardholder, him or herself, how well do they communicate to each other? Because you see, if this communication is done well, then what we are able to utilize on behalf of the idea and the concept of transparency is that we are actually able to use the P card to release encumbered funds. So naturally, your procurement division, they are utilizing the system, specifically procurement documents like ADOs, APOs, ACTs, and then the centralized of those agency documents, those agency award documents, as well as the grant awards. These are all commodity-based award documents. Your procurement division is they're creating these commodity-based award documents. And these encumbered funds that these award documents are obviously accomplishing, they need to be released. Well, the P card can be used as the payment mechanism to release those encumbered funds. So what I would like to do in our last slides together here, before we get to the point of our Q&A this morning, is that I would like to not necessarily go into the weeds, but I would like to go a little bit into the rough grass, if we can, the fringe right outside of the putting green, to kind of give you a little bit of details on how the P card can be used to release encumbered funds. So the concept is simply this. Within a P card transaction, we can correctly reference a commodity-based award document. And if we correctly reference that award document, then when the P card payment document, known as the PRCC, when that gets created and finalized, then those encumbered funds are released. So in the step-by-step process, this is how it would go. You have a transaction. The cardholder has a transaction, swipes the card, transaction exists. It's now time to reconcile that transaction. There is an award document, let's just say an ADO. The cardholder is able to reference that ADO directly to the transaction. The coordinator reviews the transaction and authorizes payment on the transaction. The PRCC, again, that P card award document is created, it goes final, and then the encumbered funds are released. From a screenshot perspective, this is what it would look like. You can see on your screen, I've used an example of an ACT, and I've used an example from our good friends at DHHR, and these are the specific fields that would have to be populated within a P card transaction, again, to connect the dots between your award document and the P card transaction, connecting the dots between the procurement and the payables. And so see, it's very simply done there. You put in your doc code, your doc department, that unique doc ID, and then the reference commodity line. Now that line is just the specific line, the specific commodity line within the award document that this transaction is paying for. Now the reference vendor line field, that will always be a 1. And so you can either leave it blank or a 1. And that's it. If the user puts in the correct information in these fields, and then when they click save, it's going to create a real positive situation for you. The second screenshot is to understand for the cardholder, is the payment that the cardholder is reconciling, is that a full payment against the award document, or is it a partial payment against the award document? And depending on how they would answer that question would depend on these fields here and how they would populate these fields. And again, because I don't want to go into the weeds on this, I just want to simply give you the screenshot and let you know that it's possible that the user would need to modify these fields to accurately, so that it accurately represents what this payment is supposed to be representing as it relates to the award document. But if this is done correctly, again, then everything will go very smoothly and the funds at the very end would be able to be released. The last step is understanding the accounting lines. Now understand that when a transaction first comes into the system, there are some default accounting values that will accompany each and every transaction. Now these default accounting values, though, when you are connecting the dots of your award document and your transaction, become null and void because your procurement document contains all of the proper accounting. And that accounting is then, when you connect those dots, all of that accounting of your award document is then going to take control of the accounting lines to the transaction. So again, that is a little bit going into the weeds, and I do apologize for that, but I want you to know that between the last 3 screenshots, if the user that is reconciling accomplishes those things well, then they are able to officially reconcile the transaction. They are able to reference the procurement document to the transaction. They fulfill these 3 steps, and in doing so, when that payment request document is created, the PRCC, it will release the encumbered funds. And man, I can tell you that come the very end of the fiscal year, when agencies are trying to ensure that all of their encumbered funds have been released. If they have been using the P card as the payment mechanism, those funds will be released. It will ease the burden at the end of the fiscal year to do what are called commodity-based correction documents. Encumbered, CECs is what they're actually called. And these are corrections are actually commodity encumbrance correction documents, and it will really ease the burden at the agency level if you are utilizing the P card to release the encumbrances throughout the year. So in a nutshell, using the P card to release encumbered funds does help the agency and the state become more transparent because, again, everything is becoming electronic record. This will help us as a state to accomplish our goal to be completely transparent so that we can be held accountable to our good taxpayers, so that public officials can be accountable in how we are spending taxpayers' money. So I want to thank you for the opportunity here to speak to you when it comes to P card. I would ask at this point now that we're going to transition to questions, Q&A. So we will put the phone on mute for a second. And if you have any questions, there is the Q&A portion within your screen. Please ask all questions through that avenue directly to the host. And then we will read the questions, and then the appropriate person will be able to answer those questions.
All right, we're back, and we're going to go ahead and try to address a couple of questions. My name is Frank Whitaker. I'm one of the assistant directors here with the purchasing division. And the first question we're going to take reads, please explain the procedure for asking for a waiver due to significant lower price with another vendor. Also, how long prior to the purchase should we ask, and how long before we would receive a response on that? So the question being, I'm assuming waivers from statewide established contracts. There's a couple of things at play here. First of all, we have to be a little careful with lower price in that the ticket price may be lower, but when you consider some of the soft costs with, for instance, if it's ordering something from a statewide contract versus jumping in a state vehicle and running out to Lowe's and spending 30 minutes going through Lowe's, picking up your item and bringing it back, a $4 difference in purchase cost may not be $4 cheaper to the state when we're considering wear and tear on a vehicle, mileage, the 30 minutes to 2 hours that the state employees away from their desk not doing their core function. But all of that considered, certainly if there's significant savings from statewide contracts, we can issue waivers to go outside of those. We don't do that frivolously, because when a vendor bids to the state of West Virginia, especially for a statewide contract, we have committed to giving them our business, and that implies all of our business. So we certainly can and will give waivers when there is significant savings. We do need you to contact the statewide contract buyer, Mark Adkins, and explain, where you found the price, the difference, whatever other contributing factors, or maybe other reasons than just price go outside of a statewide contract. And generally, you would get that response, same day, next day, generally. And then from there, you can decide whether you're going to go out and purchase that outside of the contract or whether you're going to be required to buy that within the contract. So the procedure would be basically just send the information in writing. Basically, we're going to want to know about the statewide contract that you're looking for the waiver from, what the product or commodity is. Now, we have to compare apples to apples. You can't compare, a 20-volt DeWalt drill on the statewide contract to, a 10-volt, generic brand. I mean, they need to be apples to apples. Very often when we look into those, the difference in the price isn't so much a difference in the price, it's a difference in, one comes in a hard case with 2 batteries and the other one comes in, a cardboard box with a single battery, and there's a price difference there. But if we're comparing apples to apples, significant price savings, send that to the buyer. We'll run that up the chain here and get a response to you as quickly as possible, usually same day, next day, or we will come back and ask for more information. But what we'll want to know, again, the contract, the product, apples to apples or not, contract price, and the price that you propose to pay and quantity that you expect to purchase. Because the waivers we give will read something like, you know, agency has been approved for the one-time purchase of this quantity of product or goods due to, and then the reason, you know, not available on the statewide contract or pricing or whatever. So it's going to be a one-time purchase approval, and not just every time you need a hammer you go outside of the contract. So I think we caught most of that. Yeah, timeline. We'll get back to you in the same day, next day, generally. And as far as let me see, how long prior to the purchase? I mean, we need to answer the question before you buy the goods or services. So, you know, emergencies take care of themselves, of course, but give us enough time to get a response back to you. So, you know, again, all that should take place in a day or so. And if you don't get a response, just reach back out a second time. That would be fine. Okay, and then the next question we have is, if a contract vendor wants to charge a convenience fee for accepting the credit card, does that need to be in the contract or any agreement? And yes, any contract terms or any cost to the agency need to be contemplated in the bidding documents and the subsequent award. Just for a really quick example on what we're talking about here is, if we bid for a series of commodities and we get back our pricing, and the pricing is 2% difference between two vendors, so we award to the low vendor, and the low vendor has a 3% convenience charge that he now wants to add, well, vendor number two is now, what, 1% cheaper than vendor number one, so we didn't award to the low-cost vendor if one intends to charge a convenience fee and the other does not. So any kind of additional charges or pricing uplifts that would be anticipated, they need to be addressed within the contract documents, and that would be the bidding documents, vendor's response, acceptance. All of those documents would have to contemplate any charges. What we wouldn't do is be 6 months into a contract and then all of a sudden start paying convenience fees that weren't contemplated within the contract.
From a just to add to that, when it comes to the convenience fees, we know this is kind of a hot topic. We get a lot of questions regarding the difference between a, if you will, a convenience fee versus a checkout fee. So I would like to kind of draw the difference there. So a convenience fee and a checkout fee, there are two different things. The convenience fee, in theory, is a flat rate fee for the convenience of using a different method of securing something outside of what the typical is. And what I mean by that is that a convenience fee has to be a flat rate, and let's say I'm going to buy movie tickets. Typically, we'd go straight to the movie theater and buy those tickets. But if I want to go through Fandango.com and get those movie tickets, they are allowed to charge a convenience fee. It has to be flat rate for the convenience of using them. A checkout fee or a surcharge fee, that is a percentage. That is where the vendor has the option to include a percentage, and they could either do it one of two ways. They could either charge the lift the prices of their inventory to cover it, or they can charge the customer directly, is what Frank was alluding to. From the contract side of things, always ask your questions to purchasing as you have done, and they can answer when it comes to doing that surcharge or checkout fee within the contract itself as it's bidded out. When it comes to the knowledge of the two, they'll understand this, is that the vendor is not allowed to charge the customer more, a higher percentage than what they have to pay in their exchange rate with the bank. So if their exchange rate over a 12-month period is 3%, they cannot turn around and charge you 4%. And, by the way, they are maxed at 4%. They can never charge more than 4%. Again, that's not by us. That is the credit card industry that sets those standards. Visa, MasterCard, American Express, they're the ones that have dictated how that's supposed to go. So now it's up to you whether you want to, if you see that, and you might ask the question, well, they're going to charge a convenience fee or a checkout fee. Should we go ahead and use the P card to get the goods? Well, that is an agency discussion. Obviously, there are dollar amount thresholds that maybe that dollar amount might be a hardship greater than the cost associated with your traditional procure to pay. process. That is to your discretion. But to do a blanketed, well, anytime a vendor is going to charge us a checkout fee of said percentage, we will not use the P card. I would recommend that you do not have that approach, as much as go from a case-by-case basis to determine what would make best sense for you at the agency level. But there is a difference. Again, the checkout fee, which is a surcharge fee, that is a percentage. The vendor is permitted, and they have to post it, and they have to put it out there so there's no question, and it has to be done in advance, versus a convenience fee, which is a flat rate. So even though I know the question spoke of the convenience fee, there actually is a difference between the two. And then when it comes to the contracts fee purchasing, what Frank was referring to was, I believe, a percentage, which would have been more in line with your checkout surcharge fee, just if there was any confusion within that, just to clarify that. But if you have any questions on that, we're still here. You can ask us any more questions on that. We're going to pause for 1 second to read through some of these additional questions, and then we will get back on to answer them in 1 moment. We received a couple questions on travel, And I'm going to give you an email address before I make a comment here. Our P-Card travel team, they are of the authority, and to which I would want you to filter all of your questions to them for the final answer. And that email address to reach our travel team is simply pcard_travel@wvsao.gov. Again, that is pcard, no hyphen in that, that's just straightforward, pcard_travel@wvsao.gov. Please email all travel-related questions to them, and they will respond to you. I do at least want to address some of the travel-related questions in a broad sense without giving a definitive, specific answer to some of them. We have some questions as it relates to meals. We have some questions as it relates to securing airlines using travel agencies, and talk a little bit more how the travel card works. I can do that here in a second. So when it comes to meals, we've never allowed meals to be, the P card to be used to secure meals at any point in time. It's hard to monitor that, and in the respects to how much and do that. So the travel team can give you the more official answer to that, but that is never something that we have allowed, is to put meals on the card. When it comes to using the travel agencies, if you want to use a different travel agency than what the state already utilizes, which we believe is national travel, again, you would need to contact the P-Card travel team and have that conversation. I'm not sure what rules are in place when it comes to national travel, if there's any wiggle room in there, and if there is, I'm sure a waiver would be permissive if that's even allowable. And again, I'm not 100% sure. You need to contact the travel team to get their final and authoritative answer for that question. But how the travel card, the other question when it comes to the travel card and how that works, which I'm assuming that the travel card question here and how it works is referring to the P card and how it can be a travel card. So it is locked down to travel-only merchant category codes, such as hotel reservations, airline reservations, rental car reservations, going to a gas station and utilizing the travel-only card to buy gas for the state vehicle or for the rental vehicle. Not your personal, of course, but for a state-issued vehicle. Anything that is travel-related on behalf of the state, the travel-only card can be used for that. It can also be used to make registrations payments for conferences, not for obviously personal stuff, but for like if you're going to a conference on behalf of the state for your work and you need to pay for the registration. You can use the travel-only card for that. It's possible, depending on how the vendor is set up at that conference, it might get declined at first, and then we would have to open up that MCC to allow that transaction to go through, but that is a permissible transaction on a travel-only card. The key, though, is that the travel card is issued in a person's name. The care and the security of that card needs to be realized by that user. This is not an agency-issued card. This is a travel-only card issued to the individual person and to be kept secure, just as though it was a one card. The only difference is you're only allowed to use it for travel-related purchases. So really the question you need to ask, which card do you need? Well, my question to you is, what type of purchases do you make? If your agency is having you do purchases that are non-travel related, in addition to travel related, then you should have a one card. That way you can do both. But if your purchases on behalf of your agency are just travel related, then the travel only would be suffice for you. Another question we received when it comes to the P-card self-report and any issues that are reported to that or through that email address, the question is, how long should you as an agency expect resolution or some feedback? Quite honestly, depends on the nature of the situation. And we, within the P-card division, we have no authority to state how long you should expect, outside of the fact that each case, it's by a case-by-case basis, and depending on the complexity of it, it would probably depend on how quickly it gets resolved. But certainly, we would ask and ask for all of you, whenever you're doing a P-card self-report, you are more than welcome to email them in a timely manner. If you're not receiving a response, you are more than welcome to email them as to ask as an inquiry, how long, where are we in the process, and the people there within that division will be happy to get back with you. Another question is about the wvcheckbook.gov. Is it a separate website or is it part of the auditor's website? It is part of the website. You can get to it through the auditor's website, which again is www.wvsao.gov, and you click on that transparency app. But I do believe it may be its own website that I haven't actually tried myself to go directly to it, but definitely if you go to the auditor's website and you click on the transparency app, that will take you to the WV checkbook page, and I would encourage you to go through that channel. Because of time, we will answer these final questions. At this point, if there's any additional questions, you're more than welcome to ask through the host channel, but also include maybe your email with your questions so that we can reply back to you personally, since our time has come to an end. But let me address these last two travel-related questions in conclusion. So one question is, are travel cards being issued now? And there was some question as to maybe they were on hold. I'm not sure where the information came from regarding the travel cards being on hold, but they are not on hold. That we are absolutely issuing them. We issue them every single month as we receive the applications through Oasis. So if you have questions on issuing of travel-related cards, and if that is something that fits you and your agency, please email pcardoperations@wvsao.gov. pcardoperations, no spaces, no hyphens in that, pcardoperations@wvsao.gov. And we can answer those questions directly. If you have a P-card coordinator within your agency, you can ask that person directly, and they should be able to answer your question as well. So the other travel-related question is a good point that I did not mention, but it's worth mentioning. Travel cards are not, anything in the P-card world, they are not issued at the expense of a user's credit history. These are state-issued cards. Therefore, the state takes on and assumes the liability. So there is no credit check. There is no background check to the cardholder. So they can simply get a card through the primary coordinator, through the proper channels there, but there is no credit check. And with that said, when it comes to whether or not the person should, receive the card, that is really at the agency's discretion. It's really the primary coordinator needs to have that conversation internally to decide whether or not, depending on a card or depending on an employee's work-related stuff, whether or not they should be issued a travel card. So that I can't say whether they should or should not. That really just comes down to you at the agency level. If you, to your discretion, if you feel as though that the user, the individual, the employee needs to have a card in order to be more successful, more efficient to conduct their job, then by all means consider issuing them a card. But we will not be in a place on our end to say that you should or should not, and certainly since there's no employee credit history in play, that is complete to your discretion. Well, the time has come. We have hit 11 o'clock, and I can say on behalf of the Purchasing Division, everyone here who are proud to serve the state as well as ourselves in the P-Card Division and State Auditor's Office, on behalf of Auditor McCuskey and so forth, it is a joy to be with you guys at least twice a year, and we're thankful for your attention today. If you have any final questions, feel free to contact us. Frank, what email address can they email Purchasing Division if they have an email?
They can email me directly at frank.m.whitaker@wv.gov, and I'll get those either answered or distributed to the appropriate people based on the questions.
Fantastic. And for P-Card, again, it is pcardoperations@wvsao.gov. Thank you again, everyone. Have a blessed holiday, and we'll see you next spring.